All right, we have our formidable panel, and we're going to start with our first question, and we'll go down the line, then we'll come back the other way. And you may be able to entertain some questions as we go along. All right, the first one. As an employer of social workers, what competencies and skill sets are you looking for in new hires? And that's to Teresa.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here. Would have worn pants if I'd known I was sitting up in a high chair. So those women in the audience, like, give me a sign if I need to adjust. I work at Metropolitan Family Services. Oh, Lord have mercy. Okay. I am with Metropolitan Family Services. I've been there for 33 years. I started as a social worker in our children's mental health programs, the first children's mental health program that we got with the state, and have done a variety of things over the years, and now the COO. What we're really struggling with, first of all, we're struggling with getting enough social workers to fill our positions. At any one time in our organization, we have between 50 and 80 positions open. It's a huge crisis for us. It makes it very difficult to deliver our programs, and we frequently have people doubling up on jobs in order to do that. We are not getting the number of social work applicants that we used to, and we're trying to do a deep dive and figure out why that is. We're getting a lot of LPCs, LCPCs, but we are an organization that really does value social work and the skills and values that social work brings to it. So what we're looking for is somebody who can be flexible. I think flexibility is really important. Someone who is fairly high energy, because whether we have programs in a number of service areas, so we have early childhood education, we have workforce development, we have adult and child and senior behavioral health services, we have integrated healthcare services, we have domestic violence services, and I'm sure I'm missing something. Oh, we have school-based as well as after-school programming, excuse me. So regardless of what interests someone has, we need somebody who's very high energy, who's very adaptable, because things are changing at light speed for us. So what you did a year ago may not be what you're expected to do now, and we need you to be able to roll with that. We need folks with good writing skills, and that is increasingly a concern for us, frankly. I tend to be a little biased because I went to liberal arts schools and couldn't get out of there until I showed a writing proficiency. We have a lot of young grads who come to us either at the bachelor's or the master's level who don't write well at all, and it's a huge concern for us. You have to, as you do your work, you have to write letters, you have to write emails. It's just a big issue. So we need that. We are always looking for people with a second language. Spanish is the most common, but increasingly we need Polish, we need Urdu, we need Mandarin. It really depends on kind of the community because we serve all of Metro Chicago. So we really are looking for folks who are both bilingual and biculturally competent. We also are looking for folks who are open to feedback and have some emotional intelligence. That's another issue. So we kind of believe that we can teach a lot of the content and some of the skill areas, but if you don't come in with some self-awareness, if you don't come in with an ability to be flexible, if you don't come in with some self-motivation and taking your own initiative, we tend to believe those are really hard things to teach. So we really are looking for candidates who understand and are willing to be self-aware, work on those things. We'll teach you how to work with kids. We'll teach you how to do workforce development. We'll teach you domestic violence. We do a lot of training, but you have to be open. And we, I think, sometimes find, especially with younger grads, that they come in, and they think they know a lot, and they want to move up the chain really fast, and they don't understand some of what they need to do to kind of move in that trajectory. So I'm sure there's a lot of other skills people tell you about, but we really increasingly look for those soft skills much more than the content-based skills.
Thanks, Teresa. In addition to the list of what you're looking for, one of the takeaways for me is you want to hire a social worker.
Yes, we do.
Got that.
We like social work.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mary, you're up.
All right. You're hard to follow. All right. I kept my notes with me because I tend to think of new ideas and just start talking. It's good for my structure. So introduced myself already. So me again, Mary Gollings. As I mentioned, I work for the VA healthcare system. I worked a few years in the community, in the aging community, short-term rehabilitation, functional rehab sites, and long-term care before I went into the VA system. But I've been working for VHA about a baker's dozen at this point. I also spent about 4 years working with our nation's first integrated federal healthcare center. So it was actually working with the VA as well as the Department of Defense. So at one point treating everyone from 18-year-old recruits in the military up to our 102 World War II vets. So most of my experience is in that field. Most of my experience is working with the male population, which isn't always the most common in the social work arena with adults. I serve as the social work supervisor, one of 7 actually. At my facility, we have about 175 social workers in our department. We're primarily definitely driven by licensure. We have some positions that are absolutely appropriate for LSW with the goal of being an LCSW within 3 years. And we have a large, ever-growing section of jobs that are LCSW only just because of the clinical complexity that goes along with mental health, geriatrics, and medical care needs that we treat that are very complex in the VA population. I provide the oversight as well for our service for our 9 affiliations. We're affiliated with the majority, if not all, of the social work schools, second-year programs, MSW programs in the greater Chicago area, Indiana, and the University of Illinois down in Champaign. So I get a little bit of a unique advantage of setting up the process every year for all the students to come through and interview, for our panels, our student selection, up until this week when they start leaving, and we do group soup on how to actually seek employment, both in the federal government and outside. So, to answer this question, I think I might have read it a little differently, so hopefully I'm still helpful. But I think, what competencies and skill sets I'm looking for, in the interview process, I'm really looking at those basic competencies, the day-to-day professionalism. Being on time is just as important to me as being able to meet a deadline. I think they go hand in hand. It's a problem. We spend a lot of time really enforcing timeliness, both in project and accountability for being at your position as a student, as a new grad. I think old habits form real early. So, those things, but also the expectation, the day-to-day professionalism of being a good teamwork, being a good team player. I think it takes years to really be the clinical go-to on an interdisciplinary team, but I think that it's an absolute standard expectation for a new grad entering the field to know, just don't be a jerk. Be a good team worker, If your partner needs help, help them. If another person on your team from another discipline is struggling to see what the problem is with the patient, point it out, help them, guide them to the right things. We don't want to leave, our teammates out there flailing. And I think that that's a problem a lot of the time is people start to see their role immediately, but they don't see how their role interlaces with other people. I think, beyond the profession of, I always call it the day-to-day, is the technical, which I believe, any student graduating with an MSW should technically be able to be a social worker. They know, what their expectation is, how they're viewed in that field. For me, it's a healthcare center. We know what our role is walking in. We're there to do an assessment, to help figure out the problem areas, the basic needs, the food, shelter, utility, and access to healthcare. We're there to talk about goals. To come in the door, to know that that's your job, I think is a basic standard that I'm looking for from the interview process on. We at the VA, we use what used to be, I think, pretty unique. Now I've heard it in a lot of fields being called behavioral interviewing or behavioral approach interviewing. We call it performance-based interviewing in the VA. If you Google that, our entire page will come up. It's a whole website with questions. I often tell our students that's the way to start thinking, not just for the interview, but for your position, so that you really are considering those clinical implications all the time. So the idea is, instead of telling me, how do you succeed under pressure? Tell me about a time that you were given a very short deadline, asked to do a treatment plan, and approached with a family member that didn't want to abide. And really using those critical thinking skills. And a lot of times right off the bat, it's a difficult question to answer because they haven't thought about things that way. They thought about their skills, not about what they've been doing day to day. I think I better talk fast. I think, then you get into the clinical, and I really agree. I think clinical is what you've learned on the job. You learn how to really critically think, how to go beyond what that technical standard is. The technical being, I have a feeling this patient is being abused and falls under the elder law. That I should be able to recognize. There's a standard, there's bullet points, I see them. The clinical side is, how do I take this assessment that this patient is suffering from elder abuse or is a possible victim of self-neglect and think about how it applies to the care plan, how this person is going to continue in the community, or how I can get them home even though I have concerns. Those are the things I think you really learn on the job. It's not necessarily the expectation, especially a new grad that comes in the door. Oftentimes those are the things I prefer to teach. Instead of revisit, what they did in a previous job. Even in the VA, we often hear, if I hire someone at Jesse Brown's, I'll spend a year hearing, well, at Hines, this is how we do it. Okay, great.
Go back.
Go back. So there's something to really be said for that. And then leadership proficiency. I really, really stress to all of my staff that being a leader is not a position, because you definitely get that like, oh, I don't want to be an administrator. That's not what I'm talking about. And we really have to have that discussion where you talk about, you're promoting your own value in the field, in your role, oftentimes just even on your own team. And so I often give the example, years ago, I was building a new program for patients that had spinal cord injuries, and I worked with a wonderful attending that was in charge of the overall program, and he just loves him some social workers, just, thinks we can save the day. But he kept putting referrals into psychology to do addiction screenings, depression screenings, PTSD screenings, and then saying, I can't even get this patient seen today while they're at the medical center. I already saw them, Mark, and it's done. It's in the chart. We have a plan. I'm taking them over to the next program. Actually, when you're done visiting, if you could get that done, that'd be great. But really setting up that role and saying, this is what I can do. Being a leader in that way, being a leader throughout the medical center, that when you hear something in a committee meeting and someone says, oh yeah, we don't have that expertise on site. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And it really is, I have that example. I was very proud of a student that will graduate in like 3 days. Brought me an example last week and said I was in a meeting and they were talking about how we have no particular staff to work with patients that present with the need for family violence assistance safety planning. And I said, oh, we have 175. You know, this is what we do. This is the cornerstone. And I was proud to hear that our chief of staff of our medical center, a very seasoned emergency room doctor, said, I know we have staff. Social work, that's the cornerstone of social work. They crisis solve, they problem solve. We need to call them. And this intern said, I'll make sure that they know that. And then I think one thing I really like to kind of explore and I craft my interview questions around and focus on in the supervision when we bring new grads into the VA system, or any new social worker, I should say, into the VA system, is career trajectory. I like to know up front what their goals are. You know, I like to get a sense of are you seeking out potential opportunities or are you seeking out promotions? And really talking about that, looking at what do you want to accomplish, not what you want to do or who you want to work with, but what you want to accomplish. We redid our entire affiliations program approach this year, which definitely needs to be worked on now that we see all the glitches. But in the past, we used to send packets out to all the schools, many of you may be aware, and say these are the actual positions that we have available if students are interested in applying. And what we found is, you know, working in the emergency room, in the psychiatric assessment clinic, and doing suicide prevention sounds really sexy and really cool. And, you know, new grads are like, oh, absolutely, that's what I want to do. You know, I'm going to make a difference. And you know, we can only hire so many people right out of school because of the licensure. And guess what? There's not a lot of suicide prevention jobs out in the community. There's not a lot of jobs that focus on working with spinal cord injuries. And so we really started promoting what area do you want to come in, and then helping students to understand that they're going to get those skills that they asked for from this position. And even if it doesn't make sense, you know, we're going to help them walk through and learn that this, you know, this particular program is where you're going to learn how to make referrals, do basic screenings, psychosocials, etc., and really stressing those standard social work things.
There were just a couple of things that I wanted to amplify from what you were speaking about so eloquently. One was that interdisciplinary or interprofessional teamwork. That's something that schools are needing to be thinking about a little harder because it's one of our CSWE competency areas. So maybe we'll get some, you know, good thoughts going about how we can accomplish some of that. The other thing, just in case everybody didn't know this, largest employer of social workers in the United States. And I really appreciated that you have workshops to teach people how to apply to the federal system because it is a different animal. And then finally, another theme that resonated for me was that need sometimes, and probably all of our studies, for the social workers to stand up and stake out their territory in terms of what they're able to do. So just wanted to give a little extra underscore to that. And now to Robin.
These are hard acts to follow. Thank you, Kathy, for your leadership nationally. We so appreciate it. As we'll talk about today, it's needed and more needed than ever. So I'm at Rush University Medical Center. I've been there for 13 years, and it's so nice to see some of you in the room who I haven't seen in a long time. It's like old home week here. And I started at Rush, and I was brought on to develop the programming, if you will, services around our strong geriatric component. And Julie, who is my colleague, probably remembers that. But it was really an interesting time. I came in and I had one staff member, and that person was a nurse. And I was very respectful of her, but she didn't last long. And so, of course, I replaced her with a social worker. And then no insulting to nurses, they're some of my best friends. And but basically what happened is 13 years later, we have a staff of 90 people, 75 of them to 80 are social workers. All master's prepared social workers. And you can challenge me on that later. That would be interesting. And I think what we look for is kind of the what, the why. First, the why. Why are you a social worker? We very much want to get at that with people who are coming, whether they're new grads or not. Because if there isn't the word within their description of why that connects some kind of social justice, we probably don't proceed. I mean, if we hear people that come to us because they just want to do counseling in 2 years, and 4 years later they want to, and there's no insult to this, on Michigan Avenue, those are not the type of people who are going to work in our setting. Our setting is fast-paced. We are serving all ages now, not just older adults. We deliberately this year changed our name to have social work in the title, social work and community health. Historically, Rush had a very strong inpatient social work discharge planning program history, but by the time I got there, that had really dissipated. Social workers were doing the exact same thing as nurses, which was really unfortunate. However, they were being paid better because nurses get paid better, so that was the only good thing. But besides that, there wasn't a lot of growth opportunity or development. So the why is important. The what is important. Because how we really work hard on that elevator speech that we've been talking about here, that we want our staff to be able to say why they're doing, what they bring to the equation, what is it that distinguishes them from someone else on the team, never in a competitive way, not in a way that would ever say we can do this better than you psychologists, but we can do this too. And it's really critical that we don't get into that guilt debate. I'm sure you know that better than I, because it doesn't get us anywhere in the end. And then the how piece is really important. My staff need to know when they're coming in that their work is going to be studied. And I'm talking about research. I'm talking about we're trying to build an evidence base of a protocolized approach to what we have always believed is an art. We're trying to make it a bit more of a science. So we can say not only the why and the what, but the how we're making a difference in someone's life. To be able to really rattle off the impact, what our interventions has done in terms of, in the hospital world, as many of you know, maybe not yours as much, we're all into reducing 30-day readmissions.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So how does the social worker influence that? And we've developed a model that's a transitional care model, social work led, because we believe other models were not addressing psychosocial and environmental factors. And we've been able to prove that our model does make a difference in 30-day readmissions. And that model, as a result, has been adopted by 105 institutions across the country, both community-based organizations like Metropolitan, as well, and all over the country, as well as other hospitals. So it's those kinds of things. So what I look for as well is someone who can tolerate the ambiguity, the change, the fast pace, but also understand the bottom line. Not that it keeps them up at night. It's okay for me to be up at night. They don't need to be up at night. But they need to know we have to reach certain numbers, that we have to show the return on investment, the business case about who we are. And those things sometimes are really hard for people. I also want to make sure, I love, Teresa, I mean, I am so all over it. People need to be reflective of their work. Other professions, it is amazing to me that they can sit back and think about what they've done and could they have done it differently and was there any bias in relation to what they're doing. I mean, the best thing that's going to come out of this Starbucks situation from last week, sadly, but hopefully we'll make a change because at Starbucks is the notion of unconscious bias, something that our profession has known forever as countertransference, and at least it's going to move along. What strikes me in my area of the field is things are supposedly being discovered, like social determinants of health, and I sit there and I think, oh my God, what did we do wrong that we did not articulate this in a manner so people, physicians in particular, and nurses lately, don't think this is something they just discovered. Right. But, I can't feel the sour grapes for long. I have to get with the program and talk about what we bring to the social determinant solution. I love that term. I hear that all the time. I get these emails. Do you want to come to this meeting about the social determinant solution? And I went to this technology company, had a big dinner downtown after a day-long meeting. I couldn't go to the day-long meeting, some of my staff went. And they had this meeting at one of the most expensive restaurants in town. And I was there, I was like a square peg in a round hole, because everybody there were these techno people, and all 40 years younger than I. And literally the menu had the name of the fancy restaurant on top, and above it said social determinants of health dinner, which under the dinner probably cost $200 a person, and no one saw the irony. So everybody is getting into our business. So now it's more important than ever that we hone our message. We know what we do. We have evidence to what we do. That we understand the power of relationship. That these people pushing an app for social determinants, like they told me yesterday, it's not going to take the place of a relationship. It's not going to take the place of the skills that we know we bring to engage people who are having tough times and who are fearful of what it means to engage with a social worker and assist them. So it's an interesting time. Part of what we look for too at Rush is bilingual and bicultural, not just in terms of Spanish speaking, but people who can talk about the community as well as they can understand the hospital lingo. Very different. And our staff, because they're kind of outside the inpatient part of things, they really need to know both to survive. And again, I can't say enough about that teamwork. I was at a meeting 2 weeks ago in Austin. I presented at their school of social work, which they have a brand new medical school, and they are all about interprofessional education. Kathy, you have to go down there. And I asked what their shared leadership structure is to the physician. And he said, we are all equals on our team. The physician is no higher or no different than the pharmacist, the social worker, and the nurse. That was their team. And they reinforced it everywhere. They created classrooms that related to team training. They walked the talk. So I was pretty blown away. It's easier when you're building something from the ground up like they are. They have more money down in Texas than I even know how to explain. But anyway, and then I think people need to know how to advocate. I know that it's like a basic tenet in our world of social work, but some of my staff are so afraid to open their mouths, I just don't get it. And I don't know where that comes from, because you think this generation is out there, they're about themselves, they're about their own achievement, but they have to, stand up a little and have their voices heard in a way that they're not currently.
This is kind of a jump seat here.
Yeah, be careful, be careful.
I don't want to break it. Robin, you just added so much more, and I just want to emphasize a couple of themes. Certainly the social justice theme. I love that ability to advocate. In fact, that's part of our theme for Social Work Month this year. Leaders, advocates, champions. And I think we need to bring that home to our work settings as well as our school settings. I like the evidence-based part. A focus on the bottom line too. You can't be just wandering through without some kind of attention paid there. Fast-paced, flexible again, I think we've heard. And that interchangeability that some of our social workers in healthcare settings have experienced, that it could be a nurse case manager or it could be a social worker, and they're doing the same kinds of things. In fact, recently, I heard a situation where a social worker was being asked to do medication reconciliation checklists. It's problematic. At any rate, I think again it goes back to being clear about who we are and what we have to offer, and so much more. Anyway, thank you. And now to Joe.
Well, I thought I should maybe slide out the door over here after all these. No, it's some really good ideas and some very similar things that I'm thinking of also. We also are having a really difficult time with recruiting social workers. And I work in a kind of a different setting. Instead of community hospital, I work in one of the state hospitals. I'm the hospital administrator at Chesterfield Health Center, which is the maximum security forensic hospital for the state of Illinois. So our catchment area is the entire state, so essentially patients who cannot be treated at one of our other sister hospitals would come to my hospital. Are people who are involved in the court and jail system who, because of their behaviors there, would be recommended to be placed at Chester to be stabilized. So we have a lot of very similar issues with retention of employees, being that we're in a rural area, but we serve a population where a lot of people come from the urban north. So we also have those needs for bilingual staff, which is, for my part of the world, if I have one, I would be thankful. You know, it's that difficult. So we have to rely on language lines and all that stuff, which is not the optimal way to do things. We try to recruit that, but it's kind of unknown in our area, are very difficult to find. One of the things that I look for in terms of applicants, and we take a range. We will take people who just got out of school with their MSW. We have a few positions with that, ranging up to people who are licensed clinical social workers in our staffing plan. With one of the things I look for, a lot of people that come to interview, oh, it sounds interesting, this forensic thing, you know, I think they watch too much CSI or something like TV. But you know, when it comes to, okay, we're gonna go meet this new patient, and now you have the police department the sheriff's department bringing this guy into the hospital in full restraint, right? And then, by the way, as soon as he walks in that door, they're taking off all those restraints and, hi, you're with us now. We don't have those things. So it can be a little bit intimidating. So how do you, I mean, we have the issues of engagement also, but we also have the issues of engagement with people who are involuntary. And that's a subject that's pretty much not taught in school. I also teach for the USC, and it's one of the things I always try to work into my classes is talking about work with involuntary populations is much different than working with people who knock on your door for services. There has to be a way to engage them. There's differences in terms of looking at them with respect, that sort of thing. One of the other things that I look for is sometimes people will have, staff members will have a really difficult time dealing with a person's history, criminal history, charges against them, that sort of thing. Because a lot of the people I deal with have very, very serious charges, things like murder, rape, all kinds of things like that. For some people that's very difficult for them to get past. So how do we deal with those transference issues, that sort of stuff? And those are all things that we help staff with, but it is something I try to look at initially, is how do I make sure that this person is going to be open-minded to be willing to sit in the room with this guy who has this really serious charge and treat him as a human, and how do we, I always look at it as anything I can do for any of our patients, I'm protecting society, right? If I can make this guy do something or see some light, make him stable so he doesn't hurt someone else again, I've done my job. And we need to really focus upon that. With some of the other competencies, the whole issue of like professionalism issues of timeliness, that sort of thing, I work for this large bureaucracy, right? So there's like 59 forms if you're 10 minutes late that I have to do, all that sort of stuff, right? It's not private practice world where, I'm going to come in the office a little early or leave a little early, right? It's very rigid, and people sometimes have difficulty with that. It's like, well, I have my MSW and I'm licensed, I can do what I want. Not in my system. So, with that, writing skills was mentioned also. We have to do a lot of reports to courts, that sort of thing. And sometimes I kind of like, oh, I can't believe that somebody was about to send that out of here, right? We really need to look at what we're putting. It's got to be consistent. You can't say one place this happened and then 2 minutes later down the page say, no, there's something else is the case. So looking at things consistently, consistency, accuracy, and communicating the present clinical picture of the patient is really, really important. Along with that, the whole notion of our commitment to clients. Okay? You can't be scheduled for court today and decide that you're going to be sick, okay? Because you're the person with the clinical knowledge that's going to have to testify about why this person needs to remain in the hospital, right? So if you call me this morning and say, I'm sick, we have to go to a judge and say, so-and-so is sick, could we reschedule? Well, usually the judge, if it's one that local and I get along with, it's not such a big issue, okay? Relationships. But if it's one from a little further away, that's not acceptable, So I have to talk with people. There's many days that I go to work and I might not necessarily want to be there that day, but I have a commitment to make sure we move forward. Okay? I like the discussion also about work with colleagues. We use a treatment team approach also that our treatment teams are composed of physicians, nurses, psychologists, social workers. We even include the direct care staff as part of that treatment team. And our direct care staff are not, they're not technically trained staff. They're trained in our system. They have kind of a component of providing security as well as in helping with treatment plans. So we involve them also because they are the people that have the knowledge of what this guy is doing when we're not seeing them, right? I often joke with some of our social workers that, my best source of information sometimes is those people as well as the housekeepers. Patients do all kinds of things in front of the housekeepers because they think they're not listening or paying attention to them. I get tons of information from that group of people, right?
Yes.
And knowing those resources and how valuable they can be to making treatment decisions is really important. For us, the things like some of the other folks we're talking about, we can educate our staff in terms of, well, when you go to a commitment hearing, this is the kinds of questions you're going to be asked, and this is the kind of information you're going to be expected to provide. Right? Or if you're going to a hearing where there's a contested unfit to stand trial case, that sort of thing. We can teach you kind of the basics of that. But in terms of being able to speak, being able to write, and present that information to the court is vital for us. So it's one of the things that we put a lot of effort into working with our staff to be able to do that. As well as our treatment plans. They are done as a multidisciplinary approach, but the social worker has the primary responsibility for executing that plan, putting it together, right? So being able to do that, to keep it current, keep it accurate. One of the other challenges we face, most of the people working for me are from rural southern Illinois. Okay. A lot of the patients that we're dealing with are from Chicagoland. So if I'm looking for providing some resource to link this person with, because sometimes we'll get people that are going to go back to court and they're going to get released. I know that scares everybody a little bit, right? But we do have patients that are there for they had relatively minor offenses, and now they're stabilized, they're going back out to the community. So having that information available about who are the resources, we have veterans that wind up in our system. In fact, I was just thinking I need to pick Mary's brain after a while about how to deal with this when the patient that we have. Because those resources are much more limited for us. With, here in the Chicago area, if you're looking at how many outpatient providers, I'm sure there are bunches, right? In my area, we're dealing with 2 or 3 for a large geographic area. So it's much more limited if we have people from our part of the state. With engagement skills, I spoke about a little bit earlier, is really critical for us because if you have this person who is angry about being there to begin with, right? Your presentation, how you engage that person is going to mean the world of difference. Okay? It's going to spell the difference between somebody, for the population I deal with, of becoming physically violent, as opposed to I'm not going to be physically violent, and maybe I should think about working with these people. Because many of the people that we have will, they don't really understand what their status is with the court. Sometimes lawyers maybe don't explain it to them the best according to what some of the patients tell me, or they sometimes even report they feel like their lawyer was a little dishonest with them, in terms of where they were going and what was happening to them. Because if you pull up in a county jail van, right, and you're in shackles and all this stuff, and you're pulling up into a building that looks like a secure correctional facility, right? It has the big fence and a sally port where you have to open one door to go through to the other door, all that sort of stuff. Hey, this doesn't really look like a hospital, does it? Is that where I'm at? So we've made a real concerted effort to, as patients arrive, to have those treatment team members go over there to greet that person, to kind of set aside some of the hostility about being there to keep them as well as our staff safer. With the whole interdisciplinary collaboration is a challenge at times. With even some of my more seasoned staff the psychiatrist has to make this diagnosis. And I kind of look at him and it's like, you have an LCSW, right? And how much do I pay you? It's like, remember that this is something that we all are involved in, not just the psychiatrist, right? You are going to provide a lot of information to the psychiatrist also. We are frequently called into court for presentations. Some of our staff, goes expert witnesses in certain cases, that sort of thing. Social workers primarily testify in commitment hearings, whether the person needs to be hospitalized because of danger to themselves or other people. And if it's about fitness, it generally is going to be a physician or a psychologist that testifies on that. Although social workers may be called in also in question about their opinions and their thoughts about this particular person's fitness to stand trial. So a lot of that stuff is all things they learn as working with us. And many of our staff start, kind of through the door as an MSW, progress up to being a license and take a step up into what we call social worker 2 status. And eventually, if they get their clinical license, promote to social worker 4, which is licensed clinical social worker in our system. So many of those people have a lot of expertise in dealing with court systems and that whole process, which is part of what we do with them is training the lower level staff of how do you move forward, how do you get to this point to be able to do the same thing.
Wow, this is a pretty great panel, I would say. If I may, amplify some themes. Ability to engage with involuntary clients, that's going to be critical in that setting. Open-mindedness to your client population. I appreciated that your vision and mission is if I can help this person, I'm helping society. Ability to manage working in a bureaucracy. Writing skills again, professional responsibility and commitment. Show up when you need to show up, even if you're not feeling great. Valuing other staff perspectives, the housekeeping staff and so forth. And speaking skills, that ability to present in front of a team as well as testify in court. Those are pretty important. Thank you. I'm going to let you keep the microphone, and we're going to go to a bit of a lightning round because I'm told we have to wrap at 10:30. But I think this one, what do new hires in your settings have the most difficulty with? If you could kind of pick a couple and go from there.
All right, thank you. Well, some of the things we've already talked about with writing, that sort of thing, and what I consider that whole ability to deal with the day-to-day life of the social worker. You know, there's multiple responsibilities, multiple things you have to juggle all at once, right? And how do you prioritize that? How do you have the most important stuff ready to go when you're asked to have it ready to go? In dealing with the stressors of that is very difficult for some people. Of how do I manage this work-life balance, right? In terms of, we talked a little bit about timeliness and you know, those professional skills relating with other staff members. One of the things I deal with quite a bit as the hospital administrator is, believe it or not, of disputes between staff. And I keep saying, isn't that what I pay that cheap social worker and these other people? It's like, but sometimes it winds up in my office. And sometimes it's kind of a territorial war that really didn't need to happen. You know? You know, okay, the psychologist has a little bit different opinion than you, but let's look at it from his perspective, and maybe he'll look at it from our perspective, and how do we do it? I had a deal with some staff last week that one social worker told another social worker, don't talk to my clients while I'm not here. And it's like, well, all of our clients, they can't leave and go talk to anybody else, right? So if I happen to be on the unit and they're talking to me, I'm going to talk to them. I can't just say, go away, you're not my client, right? Now, and I mean, there are some situations where that might be appropriate, but it's like sometimes it becomes a little bit of a, I guess, just a, you know, I don't like this person so much, so let me say this to them, that sort of thing. So of being able to be professional and relate to your coworkers, very important. One of the issues that we're having a lot, we've moved into this whole new era of the use of telemedicine a lot. And especially for psychiatry services, because I don't think there are any in the state, and there's fewer in Southern Illinois. Okay, so we use it a lot. And it's the use of technology and things is something that we're really working with our staff of. How do you do this? What are the standards of care? That sort of stuff.
Kathy, I'm okay to defer if we want to open it up to the group.
Do you have?
I have one thing that makes me crazy, but it makes me also seem like an old fart. Which is professionalism. I mean, I cannot get over what people wear to work. It's just whatever. It's shocking. And just the notion of workload and work-life balance and kind of expecting us to create work-life balance for them is really perplexing. You know, when I'm told at a staff meeting that that we should not be allowed to send an email over the weekend because it makes them anxious, it's a really interesting dynamic. So I don't know how to answer that, but I struggle with that.
I think you're probably not alone in that.
Okay, me again. I just jotted down a few things. I think both of these questions I could have gone on for a real long time, just because I spent so much time thinking about it. But I think one of the things, new hires having difficulty in our setting I answered this in a couple ways. You know, I really value the fact that everybody brings their own drum, and I want them to find that beat and to really bring their own talent and their skills. But especially in this organization, but I really believe as a social worker as a whole, as you know, my duties to this chapter, you have 3 drums. You know, you have this drum to be a social worker. You got to do what's right for your position and what's right ethically. In the middle of that, you have to do your role. You know, really understanding that, you know, it's not black and white, but we do have to know how to stay in our lanes and do what we do best in order to be successful. And then I think, you know, what often kind of goes to the wayside is you are absolutely obligated to meet the mission of your facility, of your agency. I think a lot of people make the mistake of you know, probably feeling, you know, in order to empower themselves, their role, they have to really emphasize their own viewpoints, what they can bring, and they forget that there is an obligation at the end of the day, the bottom line even, as you will. I think to go along with that is, you know, definitely all of my staff, definitely my whole service, staff practice at a micro level, and it's very difficult for new social workers, either new to the field or new to the VA system especially, to understand that every single thing they do impacts other areas. It impacts the mission, the strategic plan of the VA. Everything they do represents us and it shapes us. And I don't think that people have as much conversation and dialogue around that as there could be, as far as, you know, what you did today on your roster or on your plan, what macro was affected, what meso was affected. I often have social workers, I think I'm putting them asleep in staff meetings because I'm talking about, you know, numbers and how length of stay went down and what our efforts were to do that. Or social work gets left off the agenda in a group invite, and I have to kind of show up and say, actually, I have something valuable to help you meet your goal. And so I think it's really important to start talking about it a lot more, and I really focus on that in my groups. One thing, 2 things more, in the VA system, I see it definitely, my guess is it's everywhere, is actually understanding the culture of where you work, who you serve, the bureaucracy, why sometimes there's red tape for a reason, how it protects us. It's very hard for people to understand that. We definitely have a militant system in the VA. It's chain of command. And that chain, while sometimes it's just there because that's how the military does it, a lot of times it's there to protect you, to make sure the policy was met, to make sure there's no legal actions that wasn't thought of. I think, you know, along with culture, 2 things that we talk a lot about in our groups, and I do supervision with social workers for the first year that they're in the VA system, is really understanding how everything they do can affect their future endeavors, their career trajectory. It really is an argument, whether people want to say it or not, you know, birds of a feather. Who you're seen with, who you work with, who you refuse to work with. All of those things are noted. You know, reputation is not just in our agency, it's everywhere. A lot of us know each other from different walks of life. And then I just had a momentary thought and I just lost it. I'm sure it was the most important thing I was going to say. But I think that there's also sometimes an exclusion of, you know, while we really try to place value on people and their opinions and what every single person brings to the table, there's been a loss of stressing still the importance of seniority, of leadership, of how you respect those people and their opinions, and the fact that, you know, while one person really is going to value that you know the newest model, the newest theory, what's being talked about out there, outside of the VA, outside of my bubble, there's a lot to learn from the people that have been doing the job for a very long time, and you've got to appreciate that institutional knowledge to really make an effective change, even with one patient, if you don't consider why things are the way they are or what's happened in the past. I think that's really difficult. One thing specific to the VA that new hires have a difficult time with, I think, is in so many ways, rightfully so. Veterans are heroes. They're our nation's heroes. We have signs up that even say, through these hallways, our nation's heroes walk. But what is very difficult for students is to learn that they are treating a veteran that was dishonorably discharged, that they are treating a veteran who, since service, committed murder, is listed on the sexual offense list. Things that are very difficult when you walk through the door and say, I'm going to treat heroes for my career. It's really difficult. It's also difficult to see, we have a thing in this nation where we picture a pedestal veteran, we picture G.I. Joe, and to come in and to see a population, the VA doesn't treat every single person that's ever served. We treat the sickest of the sick and the poorest of the poor. And you walk into my medical center, you're going to see a large majority of people that have remarkable disabilities, double amputees above the knees, traumatic brain injuries, wandering, exacerbated mental health conditions, and it's alarming as well. And I think people are not always prepared for that. One last thing that I think really goes across the board is that new social workers have a difficult time with scope of practice. We spend a lot of time talking about this, what is in our scope and what's not. I think some of the disciplines I work with, I really respect their ability to be like, it's not in my scope. It's the best way ever to say that's not my job. It's great, but there's so much importance in that, in defining your role as a social worker, and really being able to say just as much as, actually, that's admissions. They're going to help you sign up your benefits and get your card and get you some clothes down in the voluntary room because the emergency room cut them off. All of those things can be done at any level. But actually bringing stuff back is the challenging part. And saying, I can do that as a social worker. This is my role. Standing up on their interdisciplinary team and saying, hey, if everybody gets a vote that this person is safe to go home, why didn't I get a vote? What I have to say is just as important, and really being able to bring that into their scope and use it. Just to call a spade, it's boundaries. I think a lot of social workers focus on learning what our code of ethics is, and boundaries such as appropriate relationships with patients. The example, every time I go to a group, I always somehow hear the same example of, is it okay to pray? And those conversations go on with boundaries, but a lot of it does not focus on setting up boundaries of protecting your role on the team, of highlighting your role on the team and saying, this is what I do, this is what I bring. So I really think that that's a struggle for a lot of people. We spend years even, some people never get away from it. And I think that leads to them having a lot of trouble on their career path because that is a leadership skill. And then finally, I had written down, and I think people really did focus on this, but that balance of humility and promoting your strengths. I tell especially our students getting ready to graduate, you are a new grad. That's how people are going to treat you. That's what they're going to even call you. But that's okay, because it is true that you absolutely are. And you have so much to bring to the field. Everywhere you go, you're going to have people that haven't been out of their own agency, out of their own place in so long. And you have this fresh perspective. You have your hands on, the newest models. You have an education that was based off of evidence. Based practices and integrated health, things that didn't have a name yet when I was in school, and you can actually seek that job out in your first 5 or 10 years instead of 20 years down the road. But I also talk about, with that humility, I talk about the fact that we do have to know that we're replaceable. that what we do matters, and that's why we're always stressing how professional we are and what we bring to the table. Because when you leave, someone else will take that job. And at the very most, we want to make sure that a social worker takes that job. We don't want to be replaced by another profession just because we have a similar viewpoint.
And our cleanup hitter.
I'll be quick because I see we're almost out of time. There's a number of things I would say. I want to underscore what Robin said about professionalism. I'm embarrassed and frustrated to say I can't tell you the number of people I've sent home because I've addressed the way they are dressed a couple of times, and they just don't get it, that they need to present professionally. And that's particularly true of our social workers who do community and home-based work. Somehow they think that they can come in shorts and tennis shoes because it's 90 degrees outside and this client doesn't have air conditioning. It's going to be crappy to sit in there, but you can't. And so the professionalism is a big thing. For us, another difficulty is, and it goes along with the fast-paced, but we need staff who are fairly technology literate and can do concurrent reporting. Because you're going to be seeing a number of clients over and over in your day, and you will get behind very quickly if you're not doing concurrent reporting. And I think the last thing I would say that's a real difficult, well, I'm going to say two more things. One is we work out in the community. Probably 75% of our staff are not sitting in the office, they're out in the community. And violence is increasingly a big issue for us. We try to do training. I cannot tell you the situations we've encountered in the last couple of months, including, despite the fact that we are a no weapon agency, you can't bring that in. We've had multiple clients bring weapons in. We regularly send group texts to our staff about stay off of this corner because there's gang violence and there's shots being fired, those kinds of things. And particularly for new grads, that throws them quite a bit. So, and then I think the last thing, I lost the last thing, so it could have been that important. So here we go.
Well, I lied, we don't have time for questions, but I think we had a stellar panel. Let's give it up. Thank you so much. And I think